Did you ever wonder how games use 3D modeling? In this video, I'm going to give a quick overview of 3D modeling, explain what software I used and why, and finally, explain my workflow when I am modeling objects. So, what is 3D modeling? 3D modeling refers to an object within computer graphics that is made up of vertices, edges, and faces. So, in simpler terms, it's an object that is on your computer, phone, or console. There are many examples of 3D models that you probably know about. CGI in movies uses 3D models to help portray scenes that would be difficult to recreate in the real world. Another example would be animated films like Toy Story. Thirdly, video games use 3D models, so think of games like Counter-Strike, Fortnite, Call of Duty, League of Legends, etc. In general, 3D models can be used within any artistic setting. Finally, 3D models are also commonly used within engineering fields and designing. This leads me to the question, what is the point of 3D modeling? As a game developer, there are a few things you need to consider when creating 3D models. First, you need to set a target hardware requirement. After that, you need to decide the purpose of the model. Is it going to be animated or not? Third, you need to optimize the poly or triangle count. Fourth, you need to optimize the materials and textures of the model. Additionally, you might want to adjust the model's topology, or the structure, if you plan on animating the mesh. Depending on how important the object is, the number of polygons in the model changes. For example, if the object is only used within the background of your game, the triangle count does not need to be anywhere past 2,500 triangles. Comparatively, the player character model is one of the most important models within most games, and thus will have a relatively high triangle count. Depending on the hardware requirements you're trying to set, the triangle count will also need to be taken into account. So higher count equals better hardware. Comparing different models from different video games, poly counts can vary immensely. Heather Mason's model from Silent Hill 3 is about 7,900 triangles. Scout from Team Fortress 2 is about 7,800 triangles. Warwick from League of Legends is about 8,000 triangles. These are relatively low to today's standards. Half-Life Alyx is a VR game developed by Valve in 2020. One of the enemies, the Combine Metro Cop, has a model with about 35,000 triangles. This makes sense because you can be very close and personal with these models in virtual reality. Finally, James Sunderland from the Silent Hill 2 remake has a triangle count of about 200,000. Having a higher resolution model allows for game developers and animators to create more photorealistic models. Compare these animations. Clearly, the higher poly count is a lot nicer and more detailed, but comes at the cost of performance. Also, notice the difference in texture sizes. In the original PS2 copy of Silent Hill 2, James's textures combined are slightly over 1 megabyte. On the contrary, in the remake, James's texture files are an entire gigabyte. The remake's textures are almost 1,000 times larger in file size. Texture optimization is extremely important and was way more important back in the earlier days of 3D modeling. Storage sizes on compact discs are limited, so developers need to cram as much detail into these files to be able to fit them on the discs. Though with digital downloads, developers are thinking about this less and less. When deciding what 3D modeling software to choose, most people use Blender. Blender is an open source program and is free. So, as a broke high schooler, I chose Blender. Blender has crazy rendering capabilities, modeling and sculpting features, animation and rigging features, and a whole bunch of other features like video editing, though I prefer Premiere Pro. It's genuinely a great program with a large community and a lot of resources. There are two major workflows that cover 3D modeling: sculpting and polygonal editing, or the more common term, block modeling. Sculpting is very self-explanatory and is more intuitive for traditional artists. Block modeling, on the other hand, is a more rigid way of editing and constructing models. Personally, I am more comfortable with block modeling compared to sculpting because that's what I learned first. With blocking, you want to deconstruct your idea into the most simplistic three-dimensional shapes, aka cubes, cylinders, cones, spheres, etc. The main goal is to get a rough sketch of your model to start, then work your way through the rest of the modeling process. After using a lot of basic shapes, you can then start refining your model. A lot of your more intricate details and edits will be in this time frame because you are specifically focused on editing individual vertices. Once you have your main mesh completed, you'll want to move on to editing the texture and/or materials. Materials have a huge list of properties that can be extremely useful, but are also extremely overwhelming. PBR materials, or physically based rendering materials, are just materials that can interact with the scene's environment more. PBR materials have a few main properties: base color, metallic and roughness values, specular values, opacity, normal maps and displacement maps, and subsurface scattering. With all these options at your disposal, you have a lot more to work with creatively. Compare these to a simplistic texture. These are the bread and butter of most meshers. Textures allow for detailed editing and a more hands-on approach to editing a mesh's appearance. I am more used to texturing my models by hand, usually with Photoshop, but any other image editing program will work. To do this, you need to make a UV map. What this essentially means is that you need to map your 3D model into a 2D one. Initially, I had thought that UV map was an abbreviation for something, but as it turns out, it's a lot simpler than that. U and V are used instead of X and Y because the variables are already taken by the literal 3D space. Something that helped me understand this process more was this simple GIF that shows a cube being unfolded. A more niche way of understanding this process is with my fursuit. I had to figure out how I was going to put fur onto it. The most common way is to use duct tape to make patterns. You practically mummify your newly crafted chud by covering the entire thing in layers of duct tape. Once you have the head fully covered, you then use a marker and outline the fur directions and fur colors. Then you cut them all out and prepare them for sewing machine usage. This concept perfectly demonstrates UV mapping in a hands-on way, albeit in a very niche way, I'll give it that. Finally, let's talk about bones. Rigging a model is like giving a sack of flesh bones. You are quite literally giving this mesh a skeletal bone structure. So for example, with character models, you have what are called armatures. These armatures contain all the information for the bones and how they connect. By default, Blender has a handful of preset options, like a humanoid one. But you might be asking, Jack, how does the computer know which bones to move which parts of the mesh? That's where weight painting comes in. Each bone has its own influence on the mesh. Blender has a few options when you join the mesh and the armature together. Usually, the default automatic option gets you a solid basis to use, which can then be edited. This vivid red indicates that the bone has a lot of influence over the mesh, while the dark blue indicates that the bone has no influence over the mesh. Blending between these two colors allows for a smoother transition between bone control. Finally, once you combine all these steps, you should now have a simplistic understanding of 3D modeling. Now you have a bit more insight into what goes on with game development and 3D modeling, and maybe it'll inspire you to create something of your own. That's all for today's video. Hope you guys found it useful. See ya.